Hey everyone, another week, another Game of Thrones, and we have a lot to talk about this week because this might have been the busiest episode we've had in quite some time. Plus, I do want to take a look back at the previous episode, as well as basically everything that's happened in Season 8 so far, because I think that now we've got a bit of distance from it, I can kind of look at it with the benefit of hindsight and kind of break it down a little bit more. So let's dive into this week. Okay, so The Long Night, the episode from last week, was a very contentious topic. I think much more than I first realized. I didn't realize that the response to it was quite as, polarizing as it turned out to be. People are really at both ends of the spectrum. Some people loved it, some people hated it. Now, I obviously love the episode, and I do want to say that I fully understand every single complaint that people had about it. And I think it's much easier for me to look at episode 3 in hindsight now that we have essentially the fallout, which is what has gone on in episode 4. It's half fallout, half moving forward. And so I think that's made it much easier for me to put what's happened so far in this season into perspective. The one thing that became really clear in people's response to the last episode, which I hadn't really been aware of before, is that we really all seem to be watching the show for different reasons. I think not only do we get different things out of it, but we think that the way the show is written serves different purposes. And I'm actually of the belief that there isn't a correct one. Obviously, there's stuff that could be wildly out there and way off kind of the paths the show has set up. But I really don't think there's any wrong interpretation to what the show is. I think people have had really different understandings of what the real conflicts are, who the real heroes are, and I think that that's actually okay in a show that's this kind of broad with this many characters and this many ideas. Now, I do want to say a lot of us are, I guess, shocked that the White Walker threat seems to be over. I think a lot of people were going on about, being the long night and, the last time winter came, it was here for 8 years or something like that. I'm pretty sure the seasons, it's still winter and it's probably going to be another long winter. I don't think that's going to change just because the White Walkers aren't here. But I do think it's very interesting that no, there was no, regeneration during this episode where the threat's still around. That was genuinely the end of the threat. And I think episode 3 is the first time the truncated narrative, the way the storytelling has been kind of stripped down and hyper-focused, has really become aware. I've really become aware of it. Obviously, I did have problems in season 7 with certain things that I've more or less come around on. A lot of a lot of fast traveling. But I do think, and while that's a thing again in episode 4 with Euron, I do think that episode 3, it had the right stuff there. I just think that it all happened too fast, and it actually kind of made me realize that as much as we all enjoyed, I think most people seem to enjoy the second episode of this season, kind of preparing for the big battle. I think that maybe we shouldn't have had that. Maybe that could have been pushed into episode 1. Episode 1 was very much a reminder of where we are, reminder of what's happening and what's going on. And I think those two things could have actually been combined with a couple of rewrites, and we could have actually drawn the battle out over 2 episodes. Now, I'm not saying we need more action, all right? That's never the point of action. Action is always driven by character. But I do think the scale of the threat should have surpassed Winterfell. Now, just because I think that should have happened, I don't think it needed to happen. It's interesting. The most interesting thing for me is just seeing how the show built up the White Walker threat and then dealt with it. And I think many of us were seeing the show as these characters are all going to have to come together and learn to settle their differences and overcome this threat together. And then it'll have a very different landscape for the final few episodes or scenes or whatever it came down to of the show, once all these people who have had to work together realize they can. Maybe a democracy comes of it. Maybe they unanimously decide on, which of us deserves to rule. But that hasn't happened. And I think it's been interesting seeing the show reshape itself to say, no, the human threat was always the problem. And, some people may think that's right or wrong, and, it's up to you guys, I guess. I always thought the White Walker threat was going to go further than this, but maybe it doesn't have to, maybe it doesn't need to. even if we're not satisfied by the last episode, I don't see the storytelling going forward not bringing out some really great stuff in the way that episode 4 did. So basically what I'm trying to say is that we are all reading into this show differently. We all want different things from it. You can talk to two separate people. I talked to people who hated the last episode, and I talked to people who loved it. And each of their, claims as to why they liked it were completely based in stuff that, is totally understandable. So I just want to kind of say that first off, that maybe we should chill out a little bit. It obviously hurts if the show that you've fallen in love with, that you've watched for years, isn't going the way that you wanted it to, or the way that you believe it should. I know what that's like. Everyone's been there with a TV show at some point. But for me at least, I see the issues. I see the flaws. I'd much rather deal with them once the show is over and try to enjoy the good stuff, because there's always a lot of it. There always will be. I want to try to enjoy the good stuff till we get to that ending. And once we have the ending, once it's concrete, once it's set in stone, once nothing is still being changed and evolved like the show is while you're watching it, that's when I can start to make the big calls on, things that could have been done better or things that didn't work. So anyway, with that out of the way, let's really dive into episode 4. Now, the first thing that I really want to address is that I guess I was right about Daenerys. I said that, she's probably going to become the villain in a way, or, obviously that's still Cersei, but we're going to see a switch in her character. And it's been interesting I haven't had much time to kind of read and absorb after this episode to really take in too much, but it's been interesting seeing people saying that this is out of character, seeing her turn so quickly. I don't think it is. I have seen what she's been going through for quite a while, but Daenerys has always been the hero of this story, so of course we're going to be in denial about it. From season 3, I think, is the first time she uses the dragons to burn the slavers alive. Did they deserve it? Yeah, probably. But I think it says something about Daenerys' character that she will choose to display power in the most violent of ways. And when you put her next to Jon, you see a very, very different type of leader. And I think we've slowly seen Daenerys develop. Yes, she cares about the people. I don't want to deny that. I think Daenerys, at least at some point, really cared about the people she ruled. And I think things would have been better off if she'd been happy to stay in Meereen and rule over those people and continue to help them. But she didn't do that, because Daenerys has always been driven by, for lack of a better term, greed or self-entitlement, or as she put it this episode, destiny, this belief that she's destined for something more. Daenerys has often been irrational or self-righteous or just, I guess, cruel. I mean, there was no reason to burn the Tarlys alive. And I do think that it's always been in play that Daenerys, what did we think was the logical end to her arc? She led this campaign across Westeros where, things have gone shitty for her. Things have gone really shitty. But she was going to make it to Westeros, and then suddenly she just gets the Iron Throne. I think that would have almost been a betrayal of what Game of Thrones is about, for things to, I guess, they haven't always gone her way. And I don't want to ever make it out that things have always gone her way. But she was going to make it there and things were going to be all right. The people were just going to accept her with open arms as their ruler. That was never going to be the case. And since she's been in Westeros, she's very much let out the side of her that I think we didn't see. I've very much seen Daenerys' arc as very similar to the way we experienced Walter White's arc in Breaking Bad. And I'm not going to go into spoilers on stuff. But it took me a long time to realize that this was not a good guy. This was not a good guy, despite, when they're the hero of the story, when you're with them, you're naturally going to empathize with that character. And I've empathized with Daenerys this whole way, but I've been aware that the actions she's made have been cruel and violent and very much reflective of her father. And what I've seen is this arc where she's slowly started to show the worst tendencies of her father. She's quite willing in the next episode to burn through innocent people, the people she's going to rule over, to get what she wants. And what I want to say is A Song of Ice and Fire, right, is the title of the book series. And we've taken that in several different ways. We've taken that as, fire being the living versus the dead as ice, or fire being Daenerys, Jon being ice. And what was the most interesting thing about this episode, that I love the most, was that Jon Snow is both ice and fire. At the end of the day, I don't know if he's going to sit on the throne. He doesn't want to. There was discussions about maybe the best ruler is the one that doesn't want to do it. Could be Tyrion, who knows? Could go a completely different way. I don't want to theorize because that just leads to disappointment, and I'd rather see where the show takes me. But I did find that very interesting that Daenerys, as soon as you're presented with that better option of Jon ruling, that people around start to go, maybe it should be him. Maybe he's the right person for it. Maybe this queen that we've been led to believe for however many seasons to be the one true heir to the throne is not the correct person for it. I don't know about you guys, but I just find that really fascinating, and I think it's quite likely that we'll see Daenerys not make it to that position. Who knows what happens between now and then? A lot can happen in 2 episodes, as we've seen, but I do think that it's very, very, very interesting that Daenerys has taken this turn. If you guys look back at the show, it has been in play the whole time. This has not come from nowhere. All it takes is you to put her next to Jon and look at what a just ruler does, what a kind ruler does, and what one does who's very in it for themselves. And I think that's where the difference becomes clear. People have also raised the concern that both Varys and Tyrion look like they're about to switch allegiances. And why didn't they do it before? Why couldn't they see this before? Because before there was no better option. It was Daenerys or Cersei. And in that situation, I'm pretty sure we know who's a better person to go with. You'd probably still go with Daenerys. But now that Jon is basically on the cards, it completely changes what they're looking at. And I like the fact that Varys has stayed true to his character. His allegiance continues to vary. But that conversation between he and Tyrion about at what point do you pick a side and stay with it? And Varys saying his side has always been the people. It's always been the realm. And Tyrion not being too sure whether he's made a mistake, whether he's made the wrong choice. I don't think he ever did. I think there was very much a lot of reason to believe in Daenerys. But maybe we finally got a better option. Maybe the true ruler, the fact that Jon's going to turn up later. Again, didn't watch the trailer for next week's episode, so I don't quite know how that's going down yet. But the fact that Jon, I don't know. I think it might be him. I think he might be the person that Westeros needs. And we'll see how that goes. Now, if we bring it right back to looking at the fallout of last week's episode, I do want to go back and say I didn't really address the plot armor thing in episode 3. And I do want to say, while I find it much more interesting keeping all the people that were alive and having to see them eventually turn on each other, I think that's way more interesting than seeing them die at the hands of zombies. If you do want to keep that many people alive, don't put that many people into play on the battlefield. Don't put Sam on the battlefield and then have him survive. It's kind of unlikely, and I do understand people's concerns with the fact that a lot of people shouldn't have made it out of the situations they did. While there was a lot of really iconic moments, Tormund fighting on the pile of bodies was fantastic, but I do think you should have kept some of those people out of the equation, because in the end, not that many major players died, and I do think people like not many main characters died. I really connected with pretty much everyone who left us in the last episode, and I think it's an interesting claim to make that, you wanted more people to die. As I said, I understand if it was from a plot armor scenario and you think people were in situations where they should have died, but, this idea that, I don't know, people were emotionally connected to those characters. I really felt Theon's sacrifice, or the fact that there was no way out of that situation, and that moment of Bran accepting him and saying, no, you are part of this family. You are worth something. I think that's really powerful. And it's a powerful moment to go out on. Having Jorah go out defending his queen. Beautiful stuff. Also takes, I guess that's Daenerys's, so hard to say. I guess that's Dany's most morally kind of powerful ally she had left, the person who's most likely to steer her in the right direction, and taking him out of the equation opens up a lot of great story possibilities, and that's what Game of Thrones deaths should be about. By taking someone out of the equation, how does that make it more interesting for everyone else? So we did lose characters. And I think what was important about the funeral start of this episode was seeing how those people matter to those left behind. That is the thing I think we need to learn to understand the most about death in media, in film and TV and whatnot, is it's not about us necessarily. We need to learn to feel for the people left behind that have to go on without them. And I think the funeral sequence in this episode did a really good job of putting that into perspective. You know, these characters might not have been our favorites, but these were, you know, family, friends, incredibly dear people to those who lost them. And I think that's a really important thing to understand with what happened in this episode, and I do appreciate that that was done. I'm not gonna lie, I was low-key expecting Daenerys to execute Gendry in that episode. You know, glad she isn't that crazy just yet, but seeing him, you know, rewarded and, you know, Arya really crushed him, didn't she? She really, really crushed him. And I like that she's stayed true to who she is. And, you know, she's got more left to offer. That scene between her and the Hound, you know, they keep getting drawn back to each other. You know, that's the person who she can probably relate to the most now, more than Gendry, more than, you know, any of her family. The person she connects with the most is Sandor Clegane. Beautiful stuff. What I do want to say is the one thing about that kind of opening that was kind of bizarre was, you know, yeah, the focus is where it needs to be, on the people we've lost and moving forward. But I feel like there was less of an impact on the fact they fought the army of the dead and won than there probably should have been. You know, Arya's the hero and all that, and yay, they won. But I feel like the devastation of that, you know, there was a lot of bodies there. All that was lost could have been pushed a little bit further. I personally would have liked to have seen it pushed. I don't know necessarily if that's a problem just yet because the threat hasn't stopped, of course. One threat is destroyed, one still remains with Cersei in King's Landing, depending on where your allegiances lie. Otherwise, you're supporting Cersei and everyone else is a threat. But it did feel somewhat weird that there was not more of an impact felt. Yes, they were rebuilding Winterfell the whole time, but I think it might have shorted out the last episode just a little bit by not having the impact being a little bit heavier and the tone not remaining a little bit more dour, but that's just me. Now, Daenerys obviously decided to push her army south despite not being prepared and everyone choosing to follow her. An interesting point raised in the episode about her somewhat ruling with fear. I think Tyrion raised that. I think some of that was present in that episode, and I think that it was in character. I really do. She's getting desperate. She's feeling insecure. She's feeling threatened by Jon's claims. She's feeling like the people around her don't trust her, don't believe in her. Damn right she's going to make that decision. And yeah, it might be a bad one, but it's totally the kind of thing that I believe Daenerys would have done. Obviously, it didn't pan out too great, and I appreciate that it didn't. What I don't appreciate is Rhaegal being lost in the mix. That was one of the most shattering deaths that's happened on the show, wasn't it? Really quite brutally handled, and I think David Nutter directed the hell out of that to really put across that impact. Yes, Euron appeared out of nowhere. That in itself isn't necessarily the issue. I think for a surprise attack, it would be weird if we knew that they were coming. Weird that he got back to King's Landing as quick as he did, but of course, you know, Daenerys' army got down there just as quick, so it does actually check out. It was just very much, oh, Euron's appeared out of nowhere again to surprise attack again, it's happening again. Euron does definitely feel like a bit of a scapegoat for the writers to get things done, and while that is unfortunate, again, I don't think that it doesn't work. I think it does work effectively. Just seeing, you know, them end up back on Dragonstone again, I like that. I like the fact that you're almost back where you started with less people than you thought you were going to have, and her turning up to King's Landing with practically no one. I mean, obviously Jon's going to rock up sooner or later, but there was a moment there where I thought they're all going to get wrecked. Tyrion kind of having that fantastic moment with Qyburn and then trying to speak to his sister directly, and Cersei doing the most Cersei thing possible. I really like the fact, and I think people might be against it, but I really like the fact that Tyrion continues to try to see the good in his sister. He continues to try to appeal to her humanity, and Cersei is just too far gone. And now that I think, he's tried it before, it failed. They still won. They overcome. He's going to try it again. That's basically all Tyrion knows how to do, I guess, is to talk and to try to connect with people and give them what they want. And obviously she has the upper hand there. She already has what she wants. But I really like the fact that he put himself on the line to try to do that. Yes, it didn't pan out. We lost Missandei in that. And God, that was brutal. I love the fact that David Nutter did not focus on the body, her, head chopped off body. I like the fact that the shot immediately cut to him and seeing his pain. I think that's great directing. That's what great directing of death should do. But yeah, I really like the fact that Tyrion basically put himself on the line there to try to connect to Cersei. It didn't work, and it immediately to kind of the ball to drop at that moment. If you hadn't got it so far, that's the moment where it's like Daenerys is willing to get to that throne. She's willing to hurt a lot of people. She's got that utter disregard, and I think if the previous, however many minutes of the episode had passed and you hadn't seen that yet, I think that's the moment where it becomes clear. Now, I am interested to see what the Stark sisters do with the information that Jon is basically the rightful heir to the throne. I'm very interested to see what Sansa does with that. She continues, Sophie Turner continues to just blow me away this season. I think she really is turning in some of the strongest work. And her moment with Theon's body, her moment with Tyrion again this episode was just all outstanding stuff. So I'm very tempted to see, I'm not tempted, I'm going to say it. I'm very interested to see what comes of this in the remaining 2 episodes. So, we've got that on the horizon. I do have questions about where Bran fits into this story now, because I was expecting somewhat for us to see a bit of a come down from the Battle of Winterfell, with him perhaps talking through the fact that I know he doesn't see the future, but he really did put in pretty much every element into play in that episode that ended up working out in their favor. I really would put it down to Bran as being the one that made it possible for them to defeat the Night King and his armies. So I'm interested to see where he goes from now, because I feel like his impact on the story has been much smaller than we expected. And, what does he have left to offer now? I'd hate to see him continually be used as a plot device, but I don't know what his use is beyond this. And I'm very interested to see where it goes, because I feel like he is being underutilized and underexplored. Now, there is plenty of stuff I'm missing, so I do want to quickly commend once again the music in this episode was outstanding. A lot of leitmotifs that we've heard before but evolved and used with different instruments, which I really, really appreciated. Cinematography was gorgeous this episode. This is David Nutter's last episode. I'm glad he had one more to kind of have these characters connect together. I think he's been a true asset to this series, and I've really appreciated all of his work. The stuff, once again, with Tormund was fantastic. They really did start to push him as not a comic relief character. I think it's all very well based in who he is. But he, once again, is really, really bringing something special to the show that I think the show has really needed. And the goodbye with Jon, his goodbye to Tormund and Sam and Gilly, really beautiful stuff. I do think he should have given Ghost one last hug, just gone and told him he's a good boy before leaving, but maybe that's not Jon's way. The final thing I want to talk about is Jaime and Brienne. I think we always saw this coming in a way. Still surprised me that it did actually happen, but I do think it's an incredibly interesting thing, considering so many of us thought Brienne's arc was completed and she was going to die in the Battle of Winterfell, and obviously she survived and she got this moment, and seeing her so crushed at the end of it, so broken after being so uplifted just recently by Jaime, incredibly interesting. It's also fascinating to me. I don't want to make any big claims on it because we haven't seen where Jaime's arc ends, and if anything, this has put my theory into play that he will be the one to kill Cersei. I really think that's, I don't see it going down any other way right now. But it was so interesting seeing him regress. It's something I've talked about at length before, is Jaime's redemption arc, and him to say, you know what? Maybe I am the bad guy still. And who knows what will come of this. I do not want to make judgment calls about it just yet. But it did undercut Brienne's arc and her growth. And I don't necessarily think that that's a bad thing. It's something that hurts. and it's something you don't want to see. But again, I feel like if Game of Thrones isn't doing that kind of thing, it's not being Game of Thrones. Who knows what comes of it? Maybe in the end, he kills Cersei, Brienne kills him. We'll find out what happens. But that was an interesting development. Also, having Bronn, Tyrion kind of turn that on. As soon as Bronn turned up in that room, I was like, Jesus Christ, is one of them going to die here? That'd kill me. And then seeing, you offer Bronn a better option, and he's like, well, I'll take that until proven otherwise. I do enjoy that. Sticks with Bronn's character. I do question how he just turned up in Winterfell without anyone noticing, but I guess it happens. Look, guys, I do want to say writers have a choice between sound logic and what they believe is good storytelling. And in the latter seasons of this show, it appears that the writers have quite often chosen to move towards what they think is good storytelling. Now, obviously, it doesn't necessarily come across that way to us. They are trying. I do believe that the writers are always consciously trying to make the best decisions they can for this story, and it's a shame that not all of them work out for all of us. But when little things like that happen, when Euron appears and then disappears, and I don't think that any of it doesn't work. Now, you might think it doesn't work at all, and that's fine. But I think if you did choose to want to go, yeah, you know what, that does actually add up and that connects. Bronn turned up, he got through, they didn't announce it. I think it always all kind of works out in this show. I don't think it's always done as sound as it could be. I don't think it's always done in the most creative ways possible. But I don't think that means that it's necessarily bad. At least the way I see it, I don't think any of this show has explicitly ever been bad. So, weird point to end on. These reviews have gotten longer and longer, but there's more and more to say as we come closer and closer to the end. So that's all I've got to say for this week. So those are my extended thoughts on this week's episode of Game of Thrones. Let me know what you guys thought of it in the comments below, and please be nice to each other. People were just being absolute asses to each other last week. So just keep it civil, just discuss stuff. We all have different interpretations of stuff, and the best thing we can do is be open to read into what other people have to say, whether you loved it or hated it. It's all valuable, so be aware of that. If you want to continue watching my reviews of this show, we've got 2 more left, but I make a whole lot of other content. You can subscribe to Breaking Banter down there somewhere, as well as my other channel, Loverboy Media, over there. You can, of course, follow me on Twitter at Loverboy Media and on Instagram at Breaking Banter. And if you really want to help support this channel, you can support on Patreon. Thank you so much to you guys that are doing that already. It's just incredible. It means so much to me. Thank you so much for watching this video, and I will see you guys in the next one.